Morning. I'd like to discuss a very interesting issue and something that we're always very often confronted with. We're involved in an argument. I've never met anybody that's involved in an argument that doesn't have right on his side. Everybody knows they have all the right intentions, and the problem is the other person. They always know that. The question is there any objective test to be able to figure out who exactly is right? Am I doing it for the sake of heaven or not for the sake of heaven? That people can delude themselves that's for the sake of heaven? The guy on the other side of me, he does it every single time. And yet, we have a very strange characterization by our sages. The Mishnah says, every machlokas, which is the Shame Shamayim, the sofa l'skayim, that will forever endure as a legitimate dispute. Shelo l'shem Shamayim, that will not endure. That will become bottom, will self-destruct. What is an example of Shelo l'shem Shamayim? Korach v'adoso. Korach and his community, his cohorts. The problem is, does anybody think for 1 minute they had no rationalization at all? They actually express some rationalization. Moshe is actually corrupting the Jewish people, disrespecting them. We all stood together at Mount Sinai. We heard from the Almighty directly, and all of a sudden Moshe is creating nepotism where he's the king and his brother's the high priest. We also have a certain claim, and we're sort of getting delegitimized. That's a pretty strong rationalization. Well, if that's a strong rationalization, what does it mean with Shelo l'shem Shamayim? It means he was actually wrong, or there was something wrong with he should have, in his intentions, there was something wrong. Could he have known he was doing something wrong? The Mishnah is not giving us seemingly any indication of how a person knows whether he's l'shem Shamayim. And since we can always rationalize everything what we do, it's hard to understand. What do you mean? He was wrong. Okay, but is that just what the Mishnah is just laying out a fact, or the Mishnah is giving us some help in being able to ascertain whether a person is doing something wrong? How do you measure yourself? Doesn't sound like there's any place. The Mishnah doesn't seem to be explaining that. On the other hand, we have the most fascinating Chazal. So here Chazal characterized Korach, who's almost one of the greatest Jews, and certainly all the Jewish leadership, the greatest Jews that stood at Mount Sinai, were Shelo l'shem Shamayim. It's hard to believe they didn't have a rationalization, right? So they had a rationalization, but in fact they were Shelo l'shem Shamayim. And on the other hand, they characterized somebody else who's obviously doesn't seem like a noble person, a good person, a moral person, as doing something with Shame Shamayim. The Torah our sages are bothered by the juxtaposition of, or actually in a way, the interruption of the story of the sale of Joseph, and then all of a sudden, after he's sold, the narrator takes us back to events that are going on in Israel with Judah and his children. And then after that saga is finished, the Torah then returns to the story of Joseph and what's happening to him in Egypt. And the rabbis are bothered, what's this interruption in the middle? So they say that actually there's a very important lesson the rabbis want us to learn from there, which is, in the story of Judah, he had one son who married a woman, Tamar, and he died. And he didn't want her to lose her beauty by becoming pregnant. And the second son, who did the same thing, who also didn't want her to become pregnant, and they spilled their seeds. And Judah was waiting for the third son to grow up that he could then marry her, because even though there's no actual law of Yibum, but the spirit of the law of Yibum, the dead brother's brother marrying him was a long established principle of families doing that, and that's what he was waiting for, apparently. And Tamar saw that it was happening a little too slow, and she dressed herself up and was on the side of the road, and she sort of enticed him as a prostitute sitting there, and they had relations, and actually she became impregnated. That in those relations, she became impregnated with twins, which eventually become the house of David. Actually comes from that. And the rabbis say a very interesting thing. She did that l'shem Shamayim. Tamar was l'shem Shamayim. The fact that she demeaned herself in order to have relations, and that she should be impregnated by a relative of her deceased husband's, was done for the sake of heaven. And therefore the rabbis say that the saga of Joseph is also interrupted in the middle with this story. What happened when he was in Egypt? He eventually was sold to a chief executioner, and he had a very pretty wife, and she saw him, and she started having desirous of him, and she tries to seduce him. And in fact, it's a pretty serious seduction. And Yosef refused, and she actually continued this seduction for another year, and at the end of the day, he was actually agreed, except the last moment he saw the vision of his father. And that was the Shame Shaman. The rabbis say just like Tamar was the Shame Shaman, the wife of Potiphar, who had a married woman having desires on a young, handsome man of 17, and all the other qualities he had, brilliance, intelligence, looks, he had everything. And he was also vulnerable because he was out away from his home. Nobody knew. He was lonely, been rejected by his home. How did they know what was her l'shem Shamayim? She saw in astrological signs that she was supposed to have a child together with Joseph. And she misread the signs, and it wasn't supposed to be with Joseph, it was supposed to be with her descendant. Her daughter eventually married Joseph. So the astrology was correct, but she misread it. She thought it was herself. Okay, maybe it is a mistake, maybe it's not. But the fact that he was handsome, dashing, vulnerable, that had nothing to, the Torah says she desired him. The sentence right before the whole story tells us how handsome he is. And the next sentence, she lifted her eyes towards him. She coveted him for sure. Did anybody think that there was a totally asexual and had nothing to do with desire is wrong. The Torah describes it as a very lustful encounter, and she's trying to seduce him. And that's called l'shem Shamayim. How do we characterize that, l'shem Shamayim? She certainly had a very strong physical interest, a lustful desire. No, that's l'shem Shamayim, because she had a rationale. She saw in astrological signs that, in fact, she misread. Could it have been that her lust caused her to misread? Very possible. I don't know why she thought it was her only, other than the fact he was good-looking. It must be her. So therefore, why is that called, at the end of the day, l'shem Shamayim? That certainly, at the end of the day, was not even a correct reading of the signs. So it didn't even wind up as being correct. This is just parenthetically. I told you there's two stories of the seduction. First he refuses, then another year-long seduction. The rabbis tell us a very interesting thing. When Joseph was missing, the brothers report to him, show him the cloak and dipped in the blood that they take off from Joseph, and the father says, Yoreh Yoreh Yadin. He was devoured by an evil beast. And our sages say that he had a spark or a message of Ruach HaKodesh. The divine spirit was speaking from him. Who's that evil beast devouring him? The wife of Potiphar. Here the rabbis say she did it l'shem Shamayim. And over here the rabbis say, and the sentence says she's an evil beast. Well, we do know evil beast and l'shem Shamayim doesn't seem to be a contradiction. But it certainly is a contradiction if you say she was really l'shem Shamayim. just to answer that question, that question has to be answered. The rabbis can't say that she did it for the sake of when the Torah itself calls her an evil beast. If you take a look at the story, it's actually clear that there are two different stories. The first time when he refused, and then the year-long seduction. The Torah tells us here a fascinating thing. An evil beast devoured him. She didn't try. He got out unscathed. How could the Torah say, Yaakov Avinu says, an evil beast devoured him, and he walked away unscathed? So the answer to that is, they're not talking about the first seduction. That was the Shame Shaman. The second seduction, she was an evil beast, and over there he was actually devoured. He lost, the rabbis say, because of his lust. It was so lustful that 10 drops came from his fingers, and therefore he lost 10 tribes. So in fact, she was an evil beast. So it just shows you, a year earlier she's doing something to Shame Shamayim, and a year later the Torah calls her an evil beast. So it needs some explanation. What is this definition of the Shame Shamayim? So it also tells you he certainly started, it didn't all of a sudden after rejection become a lust. It wasn't an act of lust. So it was an act of lust from the beginning. But at first she did what she had to, but after he said no, then she was so taken with him that she became actually an evil beast that actually devoured him. There's two different parts to that story. But the question is, how do the rabbis characterize a woman who's lustful, married, adulterous, misreading a sign from heaven, an astrological sign, actually, which is not a compelling obligation to follow, and because there is a law of thou shalt not commit adultery on the Noahide laws too. That was the Shame Shamayim, and Korach and the 250 leaders of Israel have less integrity, less looking for the truth. It doesn't make any sense. It really, I give them at least, they're not worse than the wife of Potiphar. I'd like to begin here with a very interesting thing, and I think it's a very good life lesson. There's a huge difference between the argument to demote Aaron and to promote one of the 250. This is where most of us get caught up in our L'Shem Shamayim. Did anybody raise any objections to Aaron HaKohen's qualifications for the position? Don't they know Aaron is more qualified than all of them? Because when they bring back Sinai as a proof of their being close to God, well, they know at the top of the mountain was only Moshe, Aaron, and his sons and the 70 elders. Nobody else. All these other Jews complaining were down at the bottom. So therefore, they know Aaron is greater than them. So there can't be, and they never raised any question as to the qualifications of Aaron. They only objected to being nepotism, but that he was qualified 100%. In fact, what they probably said, he was overqualified. We could also do it. We're not saying Aaron's not. He's overqualified. If you think that the definition of qualification is that you're Aaron, then they didn't consider themselves to be Aaron. It's like, Einstein probably could teach high school math. He probably could do that. He's overqualified to teach that, but he can do it. But I could also teach high school math. That's the problem with Aaron. Aaron was overqualified, and the job could be done by others. And they're probably right by that. I don't have any reason to think they're wrong that they couldn't do the job. Okay? And by the way, they would get a great spiritual uplift from doing that job. And as we spoke about, the Medrash Tanchumas says that they actually were looking for a rotation. A Medrash Yalkut rotation. One on Aaron, one on somebody else. It could be a rotation. And all these people were eminently qualified for the job. Aaron was more qualified. You didn't need his qualifications here. Does God get any benefit by their doing it over Aaron's? There's no benefit to God. Aaron can do it. There's no problem with his doing it. It's only he's overqualified, but he surely can do the job. We can also do the job. Is there any benefit to God? That it's a great benefit to them to be more spiritually connected, to be more close to God, is an incredible benefit to a human being. But is there any benefit to God? The question we have to ask ourselves when we are fighting for something, I can do a better job. But if the other person is qualified, what's the benefit to God to me? In fact, he may even be able to do a better job. Here, Aaron could do a better job. It's not better. You don't need that. It's overqualified. Therefore, they could do it too. But that doesn't improve anything for God. God chose him. And now we say, Moshe chose him, and now we want that job. Okay, are you saying that it will be better for God if you have the job? No. Nobody had any problems with Aaron. Aaron was outstanding. God himself announced and showed how outstanding Aaron was, but I also can do the job. It's much better for me, for my family. I'll be more righteous. My family will be elevated. All the reasons, even spiritual, it'd be for my spiritual benefit and my family's spiritual benefit. And that mine, eventually, the 250, we have 250 families that will be spiritually elevated. That's wonderful for them. But for God, what they're trying to change, there's no benefit at all. That is the definition of Shalom L'Shame Shamayim. The mission is telling us that you have to be able to say it's better for God. If it's not better for God, you can't do it, even though it's better for you. Most of our spirituality is usually driven what's better for me, my feeling of being holier, my feeling of growth. That's not the issue. The issue is, what is this better for God? Are you improving something for the Almighty Himself? What you taking this position, is that better for God? And if the answer is no, that is not L'Shame Shamayim. That's what the mission is telling us. God has no benefit from this. As opposed to in the astrological signs, understands that the powers, the deity puts signs, and this is what he wants. It can't happen if I stay with my husband. He wants me and Joseph to have a child. I don't know his reasons, but that's the sign. He wants the issue of the child should come from me and Joseph. That's what she thought it said. Therefore, this is something God wants. If I stay with Potiphar, if I'm faithful to him, that's not going to happen. Therefore, her motivation was for the sake of God. Yes, she had lust. She had a lot of reasons herself that actually maybe clouded her judgment. Maybe she would have gotten the proper reading. But nevertheless, her goal was to do something for God. Yes, she was going to enjoy it and look forward to it and anticipate it. But her goal was to look what was better for God. Korach, as great as they were looking what was better for them. I don't mean in a non-spiritual way, for their spirituality. That is called Shalom L'Shame Shamayim. For the sake of heaven means there has to be a benefit to heaven. It doesn't mean that I am. Most of us understand the Shame Shamayim is I'm more holy. I am more focused on God. That's not what the Shame Shamayim doesn't mean. How much focused I am on God means what does God have from this? That's what the definition of the Shame Shamayim. What does the Almighty Himself have from this? If the Almighty has nothing from it, that's Shalom L'Shame Shamayim. We're not going here to a question of what is the person enjoying it? Is he doing it 100% for the sake of heaven, or he enjoys it too? But there has to be a sake of heaven. Over here, there's no sake of heaven. It's just that you're trying to counter man in order from an appointment by Moshe Rabbeinu by saying it'll be better for my family. I can do the job, and it could be you could do the job. I have no reason to think that they all weren't capable of doing the job, and the reason I know they were all capable because we know in subsequent generations these people were probably greater than many of the Kohanim Gedolim who served after Aaron, so they were certainly capable of the job. That was never the issue. But so what? You can't do something because it's good. Because you want to be close to God, you have to be doing something that's actually beneficial to God, not something that is beneficial to your own spirituality, your own spiritual closeness. This is a common error that we all make. We're more interested in ourselves growing as opposed to what is really better for the Almighty. I guess one of the proofs for this is how many times, for the sake of God, we do things that are literally chil Hashem's. That sort of, to me, seems to be almost a contradiction in terms. I'm doing this for the sake of God, and I'm acting in a way that literally desecrates His name. People think less of God. They think less of His Torah. But I'm doing it for the sake of heaven. What I'm saying, that itself is probably one of our biggest problems today, that people are focused on their wanting to take the truth to the extreme, and at the same time they desecrate God's name. If it's for the sake of God, that's hard to believe that that's a very successful or very accurate description of what they want to do. So the Mishnah is actually giving us a clear, literally clear test of how to measure. The Mishnah is not telling us just some historical fact that the rabbis are making assessment. The rabbis are telling us, Shelo l'shem Shamayim. If you read the Mishnah, now we know what it means. Shelo l'shem Shamayim, you did not have God's interest at heart. You had your spiritual interest. Your spiritual interest is your motivation, but that's not for the sake of God. That's for the sake of you to be more holy. That's somebody who knows how to read the Mishnah and can make a really clear assessment of a situation. What about if you're can't make such a clear? It's not always so easy to make a clear assessment. In fact, after you now know this Mishnah, you'll start figuring, after this Pshat in the Mishnah, you now figure 15 reasons why the other person is not qualified. I've now given everybody a way how to dismiss that the Mishnah is it's not talking to me. That guy's not qualified. I know who he really is. He will be harmful for the sake of God. Okay, we'll be able to do that also. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that? Maybe this is one test that should work for a very honest person with a lot of integrity, but we all don't have that much integrity and objectivity, and therefore, what are we going to say? I mean, I didn't think about it before, but now I know he's really not qualified. What's really driving me, he's not qualified. He's going to harm, he's going to destroy. The Mishnah answers that question too. The Mishnah tells us, not for the sake of God, that's Korach. So we know. The test is, if you're not trying to improve God's lot, okay, no. I got beyond that barrier because I know I'm not like Korach, because that guy's really no good. But it's not good enough just not to be l'shem Shamayim. You have to do it l'shem Shamayim. What's the definition of l'shem Shamayim? So the Mishnah has another example. Hillel and Shammai. They were arguing l'shem Shamayim. I guess in 2,000 years they found one rabbis that were l'shem Shamayim. It's not too good. I mean, if they found one case in 2,000 years of rabbis that were l'shem Shamayim, makes it a pretty difficult issue that should be relevant to anybody. The Mishnah is not saying that. There's all the rabbis are l'shem Shamayim, but we don't have the proof. From Shammai and Hillel we have the proof. What's the proof? The Gemara says in Yevamos, even though Shammai and Hillel had tremendous disputes in law, others, on one hand, one opinion was it's a mitzvah, on the other hand, it's a death sentence. That's quite a big disparity in positions. And others think they said it's forbidden, they said it's permitted. Serious legal issues, disputes. But nevertheless, loy nimnu mililvozeh, they lent money to each other, they married each other, they did favors for each other. That's the real definition that all of us can know. You're fighting with somebody, whether it's with your siblings over how to deal with your mother, whether she should go to a long-term facility. Whether you're in a school fighting over who the right principal should be, or fighting what the right curriculum should be, all the regular fight, or fight, should we get rid of the rabbi in the shul? There's always fights in every community. People are on the other side. Do you want to invite them to your simchas? Or won't you invite them to your? Are they on your simcha list or they're not on your simcha list? Do you want to go out with them for dinner or they're not? You don't want to go out for them in dinner. That is the test of whether it's l'shem Shamayim. That's a test we all fail. And all, just talking about myself, obviously. The test that it's hard to do. You get so sure that you're right do me a favor, just make sure he doesn't show up to the wedding. You know, I don't want to invite him. Well, you have to, I don't want to. Or, you know, I'm not going out with them. If they invite us to something, you call up and say I'm busy, or I can't do it. People that you're fighting with, I don't talk to my sister anymore, my brother anymore. Thanksgiving, okay, we'll go there, but I just can't stand being around them. You know how cruel they are to our mother? You know how cruel they are? They want to put her in it. I can't be around those people. That's the kind of things that happen in families. How the long-term care of a parent becomes an issue that people can't, I'm sure as the leader in the field of that, of geriatric law, Roger, probably thousands of examples. Every case when people are fighting over parents, at the end of the day, they don't talk to each other. That's not the Shame Shaman, that's personal. Because if, in fact, you just want what's better for your mother, you want what's better for the school, for the shul, we're both on the same side. We both want what's better. Can we disagree? Yes, there can be a disagreement, but I don't take it personally. My view is, you understand, I only want better, and you only want better for me. I have to respect you, and you respect me. And this is not personal. Once it becomes personal, it's not l'shem shamayim. That's what the rabbis are saying. That's a test that we all can know, and it's a very insightful test, and it cuts into all of us thinking that we're on the right side. When there's family disputes, it doesn't take too long till people stop talking with each other. I mean, we know that because I know cases in this community that in Shiva, they were already in court litigating the will. They're in Shiva. Of course, they're observing Shiva. Sinas Chinam, okay, you know, but have to observe the rabbinic obligation of Shiva. And worse stories than that. So the Shame Shamayim means that we get along with each other, and because I respect that you want what's good and I want what's good. Why does it always come out that I want what's good and you're good for nothing? But if you don't want to be with them, or you don't want them to be with you, then you have to question your own L'Shem Shamayim. It became personal. It should never, ever become personal. Roger.
So, my wife, Margaret, who did a great deal of elder law, had a rule that when the middle-aged children came in with the mother and they wanted a consultation, that the mother, the elderly person, was the client. Was the client, not the kid or kids who brought her in. Because invariably, when they got into a fight between the kids about what was the right thing to do and the right placement and so on, it wasn't about the mother. It was about, you didn't let me play with a toy when I was 4 years old. I mean, it was always harking back to some dispute between the kids.
Do you understand how big Sadiq, this is why they only have one client to build. Now they would have two clients to build. Good job, good job.